And Joy, do you want to introduce Tia?
Yeah, sure. We met up in Philadelphia. We worked together. She's actually she's a minister and advocate and philanthropist for victims and survivors of domestic violence. She's actually authored 2 books, but her most recent book is Suffering in Silence, which is her personal story of surviving domestic violence. And she shared it with really the intent of ministering to victims and survivors in the area of domestic violence. She's also now the host of a radio program, Suffering in Silence with TMA, which was sort of created as an extension of this effort. And she, and she really, I will say that I have really been really blessed to watch Tia on this journey where she really has, it's so clear that this is a calling from God to her. And she brings so much passion and focus and just, tremendous energy to this ministry that, I've really been honored to watch her bloom in this area. So I will now turn it over to Tia, but I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm just glad to be with you. Joy is a dear friend of mine. Actually, when I started writing my book, Joy was one of the first people that I told about it, and I asked her to read my draft for me. So Joy was instrumental in helping me to get this book done, and it was done in record time. So I thank you all again. I would like to share my personal story with you. Before I do that, I would just like to express the goals that I have in this ministry. My very first goal is to empower victims and survivors of domestic violence. I want to bring awareness to the church community. That is hugely important to me. I have the goal of helping individuals to grow personally in the areas of mental and emotional and spiritual stability so they can be successful. I desire to help individuals gain support and encouragement, information and skills to develop a plan to move forward in their lives. And I have the goal of always providing relevant resources that can actually be used to give individuals a practical plan to move forward. And another huge goal is to engage others, including clergy and additional leaders, to participate in bringing an end to domestic violence. I can tell you some of the statistics, at least one that really stands out, is that 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. Those numbers are from the Center for Disease Control. You can find statistics anywhere that will be along those lines. And because of these numbers, I can tell you without asking, in this group, in your church, there are individuals, there are some of you that have either experienced domestic violence yourselves or you know of someone, a family member, a friend, maybe a distant person. But because of these numbers, domestic violence has touched us all in some way, and it affects everyone. It does not matter your race, your creed, color, your finances, political status does not matter. The level of education does not matter. Sexual orientation does not matter. Whether you're male or female, that does not matter. Men can be and are victims of domestic violence as well. And also age does not matter. We have young people dealing with domestic violence around the globe. We have teenagers who are abusers, and we have teenagers who are victims and survivors. So it affects us all. And for those of us who are not victims, who are not survivors, we still have a responsibility to step in and help. We're supposed to help the widow and the orphan and the poor and the sick, those in prison. We're supposed to assist and be there for the weak. So the strong, we're supposed to step in. And that's where the church needs to come in and do our part. So on some level, domestic violence affects everyone on several different levels. But of my personal story, I was married for 19 years before I left my ex-husband. So we were married for 19 years. So that means we were together 21 years when I left. I have 5 children. At the time I left him, 4 of them were minors. When I left him, I took my children with me. I had a difficult time. For years, I did not say anything. I tried to deal with it on my own. I truly believed I just needed to pray and just believe, and things would get better. And I realized it wasn't happening. Things were getting worse. And things continued to get worse even after I opened up and I went to my church and other churches for help. I was actually advised by pastors to stay with my ex-husband. I was told because I'm a minister and I'm a Christian that God wanted me to stay married to him, even though he was abusive. And he was abusive on every level, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. He was sexually abusive. He took advantage of prostitutes. I mean, the whole 9. I experienced it all. And once I opened up to get help, I didn't keep anything back. I was honest. I was really trying to get out of this, to make headway. But I was met with denial from my counterparts, from those who I thought would help me. But I knew enough to know that God didn't want me to stay in that. And I know that I stayed too long. Initially, when I realized what was happening and what was going on, when I was able to just form it within my own heart and mind, I am being abused. I thought I could help my ex-husband. He wasn't abusive in the beginning of our marriage. This did not start until years into our marriage. Today, I can look back into our early years and I can see things that would have been red flags, knowing what I know now. But he was not violent immediately. He was not an aggressive, angry person immediately. This slowly happened over several years, well into our marriage. But when I knew I had to go, I left. Initially, when I tried to talk to him to get help, he agreed to go to counseling. He was always honest about being abusive towards me. He never lied about it. He never tried to cover it. He just always said, I know I'm doing wrong. I'll do better. But the better part never came. And so we went through what's called the honeymoon period. He would change his behavior for a short period of time, which would give me a false hope that we were finally on the right track and that things were going to get better. And that happened a lot. But I finally got to that point to where I knew and realized I had to go. I went through several pastors, several counselors, before I finally found one pastor, Pastor May and Pastor Eugene Davis. They pastor a church, Greater Works Ministries in West Philadelphia. They're actually my spiritual parents. And when I finally opened up to them, they were the last that I went to. And they said, I believe you. And they supported me every step of the way. Pastor Eugene tried to speak to and counsel my ex-husband, but it was rejected. But within that, I knew I had to go. And when I left, I made my plan. I made a safety plan. I went to the organization in my area, which is the Domestic Violence Agency of Delaware County. They gave me $1,500 to help me move into a home of my own. I received counseling services for myself and for my children. At the time, going to my counseling services, they gave me tokens to get there. Initially, being married to my ex-husband, I was working. I had a very good job. But our last child, when I went on maternity leave, that was a honeymoon period. And I thought everything was okay. I didn't go back to work after my maternity leave. Well, I thought we were fine. So I stayed home. So I didn't have that job anymore. And it was shortly after that when he had his last meltdown and he just did not come back from that. So at the time that I knew that I needed to leave him, I didn't have a job. I had to find a job. And so the Davises actually babysat my baby for me so I could go out on job interviews and find something. And thanks be to God, I did. I found a job. They gave me the salary that I needed. So I was okay to move and step out on my own. But it was still difficult. I still struggled financially because though I had this job, I was still behind the curve. I mean, immediately when I moved into this place, I had to carry all the financial, responsibility on my own for my home, bills, my 4 children under 18. I had to do that on my own. I didn't qualify for any kind of, help from the state. Even though I needed help, I was told I made too much money. So I really struggled. When I left my ex-husband, I had to pay all the bills, the utilities in that house before I could have them turned on in my new house because everything was in my name. He destroyed my credit financially. He had credit cards in my name and he maxed them out. I had to repair all of that on my own by myself. And so I found it extremely difficult when I finally reached out to family and friends in the church and they didn't help me and support me. Even to leave, to walk out, I had to do that by myself. The day that I planned to leave him, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I left on a Friday. I took off work that Friday and the coming Monday. I knew I was going to leave. I knew what time he left the house and what time the kids left for school. And there were individuals that I called and asked to help me move. Nobody showed up. The only people who showed up was this guy that I did not know because I was using his truck to move my things to the new house. That was it. Family, friends, everybody else, nobody showed up. I moved an entire house by myself. That was a devastating thing to realize that I was in such a position. I was at such a level of danger, and the closest people around me, just turned a blind eye, and it was devastating. After leaving him, after moving into my new place, after getting settled, that was really when the hard part started, because that was when I had to go through the emotional part and the mental part and the spiritual part to try to rebuild myself. And it was difficult. It was very hard. It was. I thought the hard part was going to be leaving him, but it wasn't. That was the most easy. The hard part was dealing with all the emotion. And I just remember one day I just sat down. I had this big red chair, and I sat down after work one day, and I just burst out into tears, and I just kept asking myself, how did you make it? Because I knew that he was going to kill me in that house had I stayed any longer. He was either going to kill me or I was going to go to jail for killing him, because it had gotten to that point, that I had to do something. Something had to change. But again, I was absolutely devastated with the response from my church community. And I've never said that he or any abuser should be thrown away. I've never said that they should be discounted because they need help. And I understand that. But to completely turn a blind eye and not hold him accountable and not hold him responsible, that just added to the hurt and the pain that I was experiencing. Even the fact of him paying child support. Initially, when I left, I talked to him. I didn't try to keep the children from him. I just needed to be away from him to be safe. And so I talked to him, and I let him know, you can see children whenever you want, but you need to help me financially. And he refused to do that. And not only did he refuse to do that, but family actually supported him and told him he shouldn't give me anything. They said, well, I decided to leave, so I'm on my own. I just have to make it work. There was a pastor who said to me that the courts were unfair for making him pay child support. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. But I had to move through all of that. I was scared. I was hurt. I was fearful. I was ashamed and devastated. But I can say that God is truly God. He helped me every step of the way. And I had to function no matter what. When I was in that house, I still had to get up and go to work. I still had to take care of my kids. When I left, I still had to get up and go to work. I still had to make sure that my kids were okay. And so when there finally came a time where I could breathe and focus on myself, it was hard to do, and it was scary. But for me, it's been almost 7 years that I've been away from him, and everything is moving towards a positive step. And so now what I really want to do and try to do in the ministry that God has given to me is provide that support and encouragement that I did not have. If I can avoid someone going through what I went through, then at all costs I will do what I can do. I love speaking to churches, to laypersons, to pastors and to ministers, to let them know what they can do, what they should do, what the response of the church should be. Because someone should not come to you and they need help and you throw your hands up and just say, go home and pray. It doesn't work like that. The faith without works is dead. You don't tell somebody to pray and they're saying to you, my life is in danger. I watched him play with knives. He would just play with knives, and I honestly believed that was how he was going to kill me if and when he did, because he just played with knives. He would just do it. And when he was in front of other people, he would just be this completely different person. People actually asked me if I was sure that I was being abused, because he was just such a great and wonderful person. And it's like they just couldn't fathom that what you see in front of you is completely different than when I get in this car with him and we're on our way home. When I get in the house with him and you're not there. Some people, I think, didn't want to see it. And some people just didn't care because it wasn't them. There was no compassion and no sensitivity. And I think especially coming from Christians, that's what made it hurt all the more. Not having a compassion and a sensitivity. And a lot of times I would say to myself, I wouldn't do this to a person. I wouldn't do this to someone that I called a friend. Like I said, even though I had a decent job with a decent salary, I still struggled financially for a while. And so I went to family and friends and asked them for money. And people either said no or they didn't answer me at all. So I truly struggled. I remember at one point I had $76 in my checking account with 4 children. And to this day, I can't tell you how I paid my bills. God just did it. It's been almost 7 years. I have paid every bill on time every month. I've never missed a bill. I've never been late. I've always had food in my home. My children always had what they needed. And I can't tell you how it happened. I can't. I remember holding my head and just crying and just being devastated and shocked. But God made it happen, and I believe I got through to get to this point, to share this information. So if it helps anyone, I am glad for that. But I do know and believe that women and men in the faith communities, they're waiting and searching for a voice of authority to tell them, or confirm to them that it's okay to leave this person that is abusing you, because there's been a voice and authority that told them that they had to stay, and then also it's a sad thing to know that there still are women afraid to take steps to save their lives because women are still being questioned. Their value is still being questioned in the eyes of God. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But that is my story, and that is what I share. I try to be as open and transparent as possible because domestic violence is real. It is happening. Whether you want to see it or acknowledge it or not, it is there. And we need to create a safe space for women and men, and especially men in some cases, to come forward. I've seen men who were ridiculed because their wives were abusing them physically or verbally. And it's not okay. We need a safe space for men as well to come forward and to get the help that they need. And if the only thing that you know to do is to say call a hotline, then tell them to do that. You need to know the numbers. For the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the phone number is 1-800. It's 799-7233. The website is thehotline.org. And if you call the national number, they will give you the local areas where you are. So it doesn't matter what state you're in. If you call the national number, they'll give you the numbers close to you. And you can find shelter, you can find housing, you can find counseling. Everyone doesn't need the same thing. So it's not an issue where you can say, I'm just going to take money and throw money at the issue. That's not it. There are some victims and survivors who are very well off financially. Money doesn't help you when you have no peace, when you're scared to lay down and go to sleep at night. Money is not the problem there. You know, some people need emotional support and counseling. You know, some people do need housing. Some people need help with their children. There are just a plethora of issues. And we just can't, especially the church, we just can't turn a blind eye and just say, let all these agencies, you know, in the world and our communities, let the agencies do all the work. The church has a part to play. It's going to take, I believe, more victims and survivors to stand up and tell their stories, but I also understand that's a difficult thing. It's very hard to do. I would not be doing this if I was not clearly directed by God to do it. So it's not an easy thing, but it's something that needs to be done. So again, as much as possible, this is what I do. There is one resource for churches specifically. It's called Safe Havens Interfaith Partnership Against Domestic Violence and Elder Abuse. Their website is interfaithpartners.org. It's INTER, Interfaith. And they actually provide churches, actually any religion, they provide you with information and the steps to take and how to minister to and help victims and survivors. And actually, any agency that you call in the community areas, they actually will help you also. The agencies will send individuals, counselors out to the church to speak to the church. They have programs that minister to or teach teenagers that are age appropriate. They can help family and friends on how to guide or help someone who's going through domestic violence. They even offer support for family and friends because it doesn't just affect the person going through it. So if you have a family or a friend who's going through domestic violence and you're feeling hurt and you're feeling depressed, you can call one of the hotlines and get support for yourself. So the information is there. We all just have to take part in it, and we have to share it, and we have to stop shaming individuals and making them feel that something is wrong with them or that they've brought the abuse upon themselves. There just has to be a change. So the support and compassion and love of God has to be there in our deeds. It can't just be words. You can't just say it. Because there were plenty of people who said to me, just pray. And I was tired of hearing it. I didn't want to hear pray. I didn't want to see another scripture. My life is on the line. I need help. I need practical, physical help. That's what I needed. And so I pray that I'm able to provide that in any kind of way. Even if it's just one person, I hope it's larger. But that's what I want to do. So that's my story. And this is what I share in hopes that it would truly, truly help. So I pray that this was helpful to you all in some kind of way. But there are steps, there are things that you can do to be helpful in your own ways. Everyone won't do the same things, and everyone won't do the same things on the same levels. But everyone can do something.
Well, Tia, thank you for sharing. It's really eye-opening. Let me ask, what was your experience with the legal system? Did you go to court, and what was that like?
So my experience with the legal system, there were times that I had to call the police, And that actually worked in my favor because my ex-person, there are different kinds of abusers. There are the kinds of abusers who will abuse anybody. They don't care. They don't change their personality. You just know this is a mean, nasty individual who will do whatever to whomever. They will disrespect and abuse their family, their bosses, the police, doesn't matter. And then you have the kind of abuser who will hide his or her behavior in front of authority. They will treat you privately however they want, but they will change when they're in front of the pastor or in front of police officers or in front of anyone else. And so my ex-husband was that kind of abuser. So when I needed to call the police, I would call and he would be a completely different person with him. And as I was leaving, when we were getting towards that stage when I knew I had to go, at that point, he knew that I would call the police if I felt like I needed to. So that worked in my favor. Now, there were times when I remember when one time I called the police, they came. There were actually 3 officers that came into my home. 2 officers pulled him aside and they talked to him, and 1 officer took me in another room and talked with me. They were all very supportive of me, and they wanted me to leave. They said, get your things, we will take you wherever you want to go. The problem was that if I'd left then, I couldn't take my children with me. So that's another issue. When you're married and you have children, legally neither one of you have custody of your children. That's just the way it is. Unless you actually go to court and get custody, neither one of you has custody. So I couldn't walk out the door and take them with me. So I told the officers, I'm not leaving my children, but I thanked them for their presence because that calmed the situation down for that night. That was what I needed. The only time that I went to court, I went to file for child support, and I had to go before a magistrate and a judge for that. And when I went to face him in court for that, an advocate from the domestic violence agency actually went with me, so I didn't have to do that alone. When I went to court, it was, I had unrest, I had feelings and emotions about it, but I knew that was something that I had to do, and I felt better because someone was there with me. But I know that there are some victims and survivors who have had a much worse time than I did with dealing with the legal system. When I divorced him, my 4 younger children, 3 of them were teenagers, but my youngest was about a year old. So I went to court to get custody of her. My teenagers, they were, big enough to go back and forth between our homes, so I wasn't worried about them. But I was concerned about him just one day taking my baby and just disappearing. So I went to court to get custody of her. So I have full custody of her, and he has visitations. So I was happy about that. I knew that was something that I needed to do and get done. But dealing with the court system, it can be harrowing. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork you have to fill out when you get a protection from abuse order. I didn't have to do that with him, but where I live, the process is you have to go to court. You have to fill out paperwork. You have to sit and wait. That paperwork goes upstairs to a judge. The judge has to review that paperwork and decide if she or he will hear your case. If they decide to hear your case, you have to go upstairs to the courtroom, listen to the case. If they decide to hear you out further, then they have to send an order out to the person, your abuser, to come back to court another day. Then they'll hear the case again, and then they decide if they will give you a protection from abuse order. Now, if you have to go through that, an advocate from the domestic violence agency will go through with you, but that's a lot. And even on that first time when that paperwork, you have to serve that paperwork. You have to make sure that your abuser gets that paperwork. So if you don't want to physically deliver it yourself, you can go to the sheriff and have the sheriff deliver that paperwork, but you need to know where they are. You have to have an address for them to deliver the paperwork. If they don't respond to it, then that's another problem. And a protection from abuse order is not automatic, and it doesn't last forever. It's something that has to be renewed if you do have to get one. But that process is It's long and it's hard and it's nerve-wracking. And you have to miss, 2 or 3 days of work, which we know work is important, especially if you're in that situation and you need to keep your finances up. And then if you're dealing with in a situation where you have children, you need childcare for your children while you're dealing with all of this. So it's just a snowball effect. So many things come into play that can just be devastating.
Hey, Tia, thank you for your story. And I'm just wondering, your husband maybe in particular, or is there statistically some explanation where this violence comes from? Would psychologists say, hey, they had issues growing up? It comes from somewhere?
Yes. Usually it's a person who abuses was most times abused themselves as a child or somewhere. So men in particular may have been abused by their mothers or fathers or older siblings or somebody close in the family. So, and not just domestic violence, but even sexual assault. Someone who commits those acts, a lot of times those acts were committed against them. But that's still not an excuse, because there are a lot of people who were abused, who were raped or molested, and they got help that they needed for themselves, and they did not go on to repeat the violence that was committed against them. And I say that because there are some people who use that as an excuse. There are some people who say, this was done to me, that's why I did it to you. But that's not taking accountability and responsibility for your actions, because you still make a decision. In particular with my ex-husband, he could stand in my face and yell and scream or push me and shove me. But if we're driving and you get pulled over, you're not going to push and shove this police officer. When you go to work and you have a bad day, you're not going to say whatever you want to say to your manager. You're not going to pick up a chair and throw it across the office. So he made conscious decisions on what he did, when he did it, and who he did it to. But yes, a lot of individuals did experience abuse, and he did. He experienced abuse as a child, and I knew that. And so for me, I've always said I knew he wasn't just a monster. That didn't just come from nowhere. I saw it. I mean, we were together forever. We were 18 when we met. So I knew his life. But the same way that he was abused, I was abused also. And I didn't put him in fear of his life. I didn't internalize it and then try to hurt him because of what was done to me. He made the conscious choice to not get help for himself. And he used that as an excuse. But hurt people. Yeah.
So Tia, what would you share with us about from what you've learned as it relates to someone who is abusive? What is and I'm sure each case is different, but what is what's the differentiator, or some of them, between those that successfully can transform out of that cycle and those that do not? Like, for example, how are your children? What's their relationship with your ex-husband now? Do you see some of that cycle being repeated? I certainly hope that's not the case with your kiddos. Any thoughts from that perspective, just to help us learn?
Mm-hmm. So for me, I can say, in particular, like I don't talk about my children individually, but I can say generally, there are children who, they do suffer. There's no question about it. So children in a house where there is domestic violence, whatever the form is, they do need help, and they need counseling for themselves. And there are some children who can go through counseling and they move through their lives and they're okay. There are some children, unfortunately, who do repeat the patterns. There are some children who, another thing with custody is, even if a parent is is abusive, you can't take custody away from that parent. You can ask for visitation rights to be set somewhere in the state under authorities, but that you can't pull that parent away from that child. It doesn't work like that. It has to be an extreme case for parental rights to be taken away. So children do need counseling services, especially if they're still interacting with the abusive parent. Some children hold it in, and when they grow up, as they're becoming adults, you can see it in their behavior and in their thinking, and they just start to demonstrate how they were affected. Some children protect themselves by blocking the memories. Some of them pretend like nothing has happened at all, and they just go through life functioning until they can't function anymore. I would say a takeaway on anyone dealing with a relationship and domestic violence, I would say don't ignore the red flags. If you have a question in your mind, if you think this may be an abusive situation, what he did to me or what she just did to me or just said to me was just out of line, and I'm not sure, I would tell anybody, call a hotline and speak to a counselor. Because if you're thinking and feeling a particular way, that's not for no reason. You shouldn't walk away from a disagreement, because you can agree to disagree. You can be angry and state your case and not be abusive. Anger is not the issue. It's okay to be angry, but you don't slap somebody in the face because you're angry. You don't put somebody's head through a window because you're angry. And so don't ignore the red flags. And if you're feeling uneasy or uncomfortable, don't ignore that. Talk to someone. Talk to someone who you trust. Call the hotline. Talk to a family or friend. Definitely don't keep silent about it, because silence allows abuse to thrive. But when you open up, when you start to talk about it, and you can get your thoughts out, that will help you in a process. So I think a huge part is to come out of denial. Don't let shame keep you silent. Don't think that you can change another person. That's a huge thing. I've counseled people and talked to people and said, well, he's bad at this or she's bad at that, but when we get married, it'll change. No, it won't. You can't change a person. Marriage is a piece of paper. It's a certificate. Okay, that doesn't change a person's personality. Whomever they are when you're dating, when you're met, that's who they're going to be after you say, I do. So don't go into a relationship or stay in a relationship thinking that you can change. But absolutely don't ignore red flags. If someone is trying to control you, he needs to know where you are at all times. You have to answer your phone. You have to respond to him quickly. He has to know where you are. He's keeping you from your family and your friends. He's controlling your money. Or he's leaving all the responsibility on you. You have to fix everything. He's just left it to you. You need to make sure that the mortgage is paid. You need to make sure that food is in the house. And he just tells you what to do. All of those things. Calling you out of your name, speaking to you harshly, treating you one way when you're alone and completely different when you're in front of other people. All of that. Just don't ignore it, because wherever it starts, and I tell people this also, there are different kinds of abuse, but it could be verbal, it could be emotional, financial. All of it leads into physical abuse. So it may not be, some people question and they say, I don't know if I'm being abused because he's only yelling at me. I don't know if I'm being abused. He's taking the money and I don't know what's happening. That is abuse. But wherever it starts, it all leads to physical. If it's not stopped, if it's not checked, if that problem is not corrected, eventually it all leads to physical abuse. But don't wait until you get to that point. Don't wait until he calls you another name. Don't wait until he puts you up against the wall. Or don't wait until, she's attacking you in your sleep. I've heard stories from men, Normally, you think if you take the average woman and the average man, he can physically overpower her if he needed to. But there are women who wait until men go to sleep and physically attack them in their sleep. I know of a woman who attacked her husband. She will wait until he was driving, literally driving a car on a highway, and would physically attack him while she was driving. All of that. Just don't ignore it. And you pay attention. This person is really being nice to me today. Why? What do they want from you? What is it that they are giving you niceness for, that they need? There are women that would be really nice to men. Well, it's time for her mortgage to be paid. After you pay her mortgage, then you're going to go back to dealing with her behavior. After you pay her car note, after you give her whatever it is that she wants, then she's going to go back to disrespecting you and trashing you and making you feel like nothing. So you have to pay attention to all the red flags. And if you don't know what all the red flags are, again, go to the hotline. Go to any hotline, the website, the phone number, call advocates and talk. There's a list of red flags. And even if you're just not sure, just ask and talk. It's better to talk and get that out and work it through than to just keep silent and keep it in. And you have this one thing that builds into another. And everybody's different. You know, how Susie is abused is not how Karen is abused. How John is abused is not how Mike is abused. So you can't compare one to the other. But how does it make you feel? How do you feel? And you should still feel like a decent human being. You should still feel loved. When you're dealing with anyone, you should still feel like I have my dignity and my respect intact. If this person is tearing you down, that's not normal. Something is wrong with that.
Tia, thank you for that. That's very helpful. The other thing I wanted to go back to real quick was you mentioned in your journey how important the need was and how often you failed to receive assistance in the form of practical solutions. And I think that's true of many areas where people need help. Is there may be someone to talk to or something like that, but it doesn't always extend to how do you meet those very practical needs, whether it's a rent payment or childcare that day or just whatever. So as you think about the faith community and your experience, what guidance would you give a church or another faith community in terms of what that might look like, in terms of how someone in your situation at the time could access? What practical solutions would you say are, we need to provide a structure for?
Okay. So the first thing that I would say to a church is to contact Safe Haven's Interfaith Partnership to get information. I would say contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline to get information, because a trained person will teach you and will inform you of what you need to know. On a more practical level, if someone walks into your church and says, this is my story, this is what's happening to me, the first thing that you do is believe that person. You support that person and you meet whatever immediate need that they have. So if this person is saying my life is in danger, you need to make sure that he or she is okay. So if you need to, at that point, call the police, you do that. You make sure that person is immediately right then and there safe and okay. So that may mean going to the police. That may mean asking them questions. Do you have a place to live? Do we need to find you shelter for tonight? Do you need food to eat? Do you need clothes to wear? Do you have children with you? Are they okay? Where are they? What do you need right now? So you focus on the immediate need of that individual, and then you begin to lay out a plan. When you make sure that they're safe and okay in that moment, then you help them lay out a plan. And that plan may be, do you now need counseling? Do you need to be in a safe house somewhere, a shelter? Do we need to help you find an apartment? Do you need to go back to school? Do we need to help you with your education? Do we need to help you find a job? Do we need to help you with your resume? So those are the practical steps that need to be put into place after you make sure that that person is immediately okay right then and there in that spot. But you start with believing that person. You don't tell someone you don't look like someone who's abused. Because I was told that. I was told when I told my story, you don't look like somebody who's experienced domestic violence. You're not crying. You can put a sentence together. You're telling me the story. You just look too good. You sound too good. And I just couldn't believe it. Like, so you want me to cry? You want to see bruises? You want me to be broken? You know, I'm really as clear as possible telling you this is me. This is what is happening. I need help. But because I don't look the way you think I should look, you don't believe me. That's not how you meet a person dealing with domestic violence. Everybody is different. Some people you will see bruises. Me, you never saw a bruise. He was physically abusive, but he never left a bruise on me. And he was proud of himself because of that. I remember one morning I got up and I just started moving around the house, just doing regular stuff. Laundry, cleaning the house, dealing with the kids. And I just felt it was just a shock of pain through my whole body. I was just in pain every time I moved. And then I just remembered. I remembered what he did to me the day before. He was pushing and pulling on me and throwing me around, and my whole body was just hurting. But I didn't have a bruise. I didn't have any bruises. So if I said to somebody he is physically abusive, they wanted to see a cast, for a broken bone. They wanted to see a black eye. They were like, well, do you have makeup covering your bruises? You look too good. You sound too good. Your voice isn't quivering right now. You're not crying. And I mean, it's been the grace of God, I know. Under tough situations, I've been able to keep my composure. I think that's just God. God has just helped me do that. But because I could keep my composure, people said to me, you don't fit the description of domestic violence. But you definitely don't meet a person with that. Don't do that. You believe them and support them. And sometimes you just listen. Sometimes people don't need answers. Sometimes they don't need advice. You listen and hear them out. Hear what they're saying.
So you're obviously what I would consider a success story. What percentage of people are success stories where they get away and they are able to start their life, over and new and
that's a number that I can't give you because of the stigma around domestic violence. There are people, men and women, who have survived and they don't say anything. They have moved on with their lives and they just want to keep it buried and just don't want to discuss it. Because even as a survivor, for me to have gone through and to have been successful, I still get met with some disappointing reactions from people. I still get, well, you just don't look like it. You just don't sound like it. So I believe that there are a lot of success stories. Unfortunately, you only hear, in the news when someone has been killed, when someone has been arrested, but there aren't a lot of people. And I do understand there are not a lot of people who come back and say, I made it through. I'm okay. So I can't give you an accurate number on that. I'm sure that there are survivors. But again, I can tell you without even asking, I know that several of you, in some kind of way, you have contact with someone who has been involved with domestic violence, and they're not going to share their stories openly. And that's understandable.
Tia, I have a question. How did you help your children through all this? How did you help them understand because as kids of watching their parents go through this, you want to hope that, first of all, you don't understand why dad's like that or why mom's like that, or they're supposed to be in love, and why do you treat? How did you help your kids process? What'd you do for them? Not you personally, but did you get counseling or how'd that
Yeah.
work?
So just in general, counseling, it's letting kids be kids. It's letting them express what they need to express in their way. Some kids won't talk. Some of them will. But you know your children. You know what they need. So for my children, I did make sure that counseling was provided for them. For other individuals, unfortunately, there is a thing even with adults. Whatever happens in this house stays in this house. So some people still deal with that secrecy, and children suffer with that. I know some children are able to go, well, before COVID, some children were able to go to school and talk to the school counselors about issues, talk to the school nurse. But if a parent wants to get help for their children, it is available. So even if you contact the domestic violence agency for your children, counseling is available for them. And it doesn't have to be through an agency. You can find counselors in your community. But when you're dealing with domestic violence, whatever counselor you go to needs to be someone who is versed in domestic violence. A regular counselor who doesn't deal with domestic violence is not going to help. A problem that some couples have when they're dealing with domestic violence, some counselors will say this is an anger issue and will put the couple in counseling. You can't do that when you're dealing with domestic violence. Healthy marriage counseling assumes that you're dealing with two people who are on an equal playing field. They both have equal say in their marriage. The wife is just as important as the husband. The husband is just as important as the wife. So we're going into marriage counseling and we're going to work on this together, be it communication or whatever else. Domestic violence takes away the power of one of those individuals. So if one of you go to marriage counseling, in marriage counseling, one of you is not going to be able to speak freely. And if you do, you're going to be punished for it later. One of you is going to have to just sit there and lie, and that's not helpful. So domestic violence is not about anger. It's about violence. And before a couple goes to counseling together, the domestic violence needs to be dealt with. And that's not something that's dealt with overnight. So when you deal with domestic violence, counseling for children or adults, it needs to be someone who is versed in that area and knows what they're doing, because a counselor can cause more damage. There was a counselor that my ex-husband went to see, and he told him that he needed to play video games because he was stressed. And I couldn't believe it. And, I'm like, what did you tell this man? You're abusing me, and he told you to go home and play video games because you're stressed. You have to deal with someone who knows what they're doing in domestic violence.
Well, Joy, thank you for inviting Tia. Much appreciated. And thank you, Tia, for opening our eyes. Very sobering. You gave us a lot to think about, and we pray for those victims of domestic abuse that they be able to get the help that they need, and that your ministry is able to reach a lot of others. And I think part of your story illustrated that churches do have a role to play, and they hope that they're much more sensitive to people that are victims of domestic abuse. So I want to thank you for everything you said today.
Thank you.
Very, very
Thank you.
So, well, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I